My name is Nicolas Wenner, and I am presenting FiberShed's Fiber Visions project. For this project, we created graphics to visualize regenerative annual cycles for three fibers in our region, dogbane, wool, and cotton, and grounded those visions with textiles made locally from those fibers. In this session, we're focusing on dogbane. I will present the graphics, which will also be shared online, and we will hear from a local Indigenous person who is carrying on the traditions of tending and working with this native bass fiber plant. I want to start by acknowledging that I am a European American white man, and that the knowledge expressed in these graphics is not original to myself or to FiberShed. It was developed by generations of Indigenous people and generously shared by Redbird, who has Pomo, Paiute, Wailaki, and Wintu heritage, Nick Tiphon and Dr. Peter Nelson, who are members of the Federated Indians of Grayton Rancheria, Ben Cunningham Summerfield, who has Mountain Maidu, Pit River, and Anishinaabe heritage, and others. We also draw upon the thinking of European American author Kat Anderson, who worked closely with California Indigenous peoples to write the book Tending the Wild. Kat writes in that book, "We desperately need to foster a new vision of human-nature relationships and the place of humans in the natural world. Those who peopled California before the arrival of Westerners are some of the best teachers." And one of the plants those people work with is dogbane. And dogbane is a perennial plant that grows in moist, open habitats throughout North America. It has served as a major fiber plant for Indigenous peoples for thousands of years. It is a bast fiber plant, meaning the fibers are harvested from the stalk of the plant, like flax and hemp. These are the base graphics for the annual cycle of dogbane. They show one possible annual cycle developed and shared by members of the Southern Pomo and Coast Miwok people. The cycle is appropriate to their traditional lands in Northern California, and it illustrates key principles that may guide practices for differing peoples and places. So we'll zoom into these, but as an overview, time is flowing from left to right, and you can see that we've broken the year into two seasons, a wet season and a dry season. And if you look in the wet season at the rain, that's actually a graph of the precipitation over the year. And you can see that there's definitely a wet season and a dry season in this region. And we also show the solstices and the equinoxes to help tie the movements of people and the growth of plants to the cycles of nature. We look to this indigenous system for inspiration. What would it look like to honor the principles that underlie indigenous stewardship and use of dogbane in all the relationships that meet our material needs? How could this shape gardens, farms, and landscapes? I also note that dogbane needs to be gathered and propagated with permission and care, and harvesting from wild plants and propagating new ones should be done in conversation with local indigenous people and land stewards. For example, propagating dogbane with stalks from outside a tribal group's ancestral homeland may not be appropriate. One great way to get involved is to volunteer, and for example, the Dogbane Preserve in Santa Rosa hosts annual volunteer days to tend the land. And we'll hear more about that preserve in a bit. So first, zooming in on the wet season. And here, Indigenous stewards harvest dogbane stalks for their fiber around the time of the first rains and after the stalks have died back for the year. When the conditions are right, the patch is burned to clear material and to stimulate the growth of new sprouts from the perennial roots. And we'll focus in on a few specific aspects of this scene, and all of this will be shared online, and there we'll also give more details about some of these, and we'll give an overview today. So, reviving traditional practices. Many tribes have relationships with dogbane that span thousands of years. For example, woven dogbane bags from more than 10,000 years ago have been preserved in the desert caves of the Great Basin. And Ben Cunningham Summerfield shares, "Native people are still here. We are reviving our languages. We are reviving our traditional practices. We are sharing our knowledge." Reciprocity. Native stewards harvest dogbane after the stalks die back for the year, maintaining and supporting the health of the plant by leaving the roots intact and clearing dead material. This contrasts greatly with how annual fiber plants and timber are currently harvested for fiber. Tending with fire. Fire clears old material and triggers the growth of new shoots. The timing for successful burn will depend on actual conditions and events on the landscape, rather than a calendar date. And wherever traditional practices like burning are not possible, stewards can use manual weeding and brush clearing to achieve similar results. Grazing is not recommended because dogbane is toxic if ingested by sheep, humans, and other animals. Renewal. By working with a deep-rooted perennial and harvesting shoots only after they have died back for the year, Indigenous stewards preserve and enhance the renewal capacity of their fiber source each year. Supporting Indigenous access to and stewardship of land will expand the use, revival, and continued refinement of traditional practices. And we see examples of this in the Santa Rosa area at the Dogbane Preserve and in Yosemite National Park. You can learn more about whose land you're on by visiting the website native-land.ca. How did those people tend the land? How do they tend the land now? What would support them to continue and grow these practices? And here's a graphic that summarizes everything that I just shared, and these will all be available online. And now zooming into the dry season. And here, dogbane matures throughout the dry season. Indigenous people extract bast fibers from harvested dogbane stalks, spin it into cordage, and craft clothing, nets, bags, and other items. And we'll focus in again on a few specific aspects. Observation and practice. Ben Cunningham Summerfield shares, a practitioner needs to spend time in the environment and learn what the landscape has to teach them. Traditional ecological knowledge is not a blanket practice. It requires careful observation, patience, and practice. Similarly, Nick Tippon shared that just because people in the past did it some way doesn't mean it's right. The heart is continued examination of our relationships. Stewardship. Tending dogbane is part of a larger stewardship role that aims to benefit more than humans alone. For example, healthy dogbane supports pollinators and birds as well as humans. Native people didn't look at the land as something separate, notes Nick Tippon. Properly tended dogbane grows long, straight stalks with few branches and has provided fine, long, and strong fibers for cordage, netting, clothing, and more throughout North America for more than 10,000 years. And those fibers were part of bioregional material cultures. Indigenous peoples throughout the world have evolved unique material cultures that are appropriate to their home regions and based on the fibers and other materials offered to them. Dogbane is one of several major fibers cultivated in the Northern California landscape. As a natural fiber plant, dogbane offers the gift of fiber that can be used and then returned to the land when we are done. The fiber will eventually break down and nourish the soil and start the cycle again. Fostering deep relationships. Kat Anderson writes, by using a plant or an animal, interacting with it where it lives, and tying your well-being to its existence, you can be intimate with it and understand it. The elders challenged the notion I had grown up with, that one should respect nature by leaving it alone, by showing me that we learn respect through the demands put on us by the great responsibility of using a plant or animal. And here's a graphic that summarizes a lot of what I just shared, and again, these will be available online. We've just shared one cycle for one place, developed and shared by generations of Southern Pomo and Coast Miwok people in their traditional homeland, and delved into some of the principles that underlie stewardship of dogbane by multiple Indigenous groups. What would it look like to honor those principles in all the relationships that meet our material needs? How could this shape gardens, farms, and landscapes? We'll now ground the vision we've shared by hearing from Redbird about the Dogbane patch he helps tend at the Santa Rosa Dogbane Preserve, and about some of the traditional items he has crafted from that patch.
This Dogbane patch was, well, it goes back, you know, hundreds of years and probably thousands of years. The people have been tending to this patch because Dogbane was such an important resource for native people. It was used for everything, for clothing, baskets, tools, because Dogbane is one of the easiest fibers to extract. We used a lot of different fibers here in California, but Dogbane is the easiest, and it's used all around. It's used all across North America. Sometimes it's called Indian hemp. I'm Pomo. I most closely associate with my Pomo heritage, mainly because that's where we are now, and that's where I live, and traditional Pomo territory. But I'm also Wailaki, Wintu, and Paiute. People have been calling me Redbird. It was at least 5 square miles, this Dogbane patch. It was supplying a large portion of this area, California. The stocks from here were traded far and wide. The experts say that it was producing industrial outputs without having rows or without being monocropped, but just by the particular way of tending, they were able to do that. And that a big part of that tending was having fire, putting fire on the land. And so they picked this spot because it's prone to fire. A lot of what we know about burn regimens of any particular plant has been lost, and we're having to relearn that because every plant is different. They all had different cycles, and even one plant would have more than one cycle depending on what you wanted to come out of it. I tell people that the operating manual for California was a thick book at one time, and we're just now trying to piece that book back together, and it's still a thin book for the most part. But we're learning more about Dogbane because we are able to burn it here and there. What we learned after the Tubbs fire was that immediately after the burn, the Dogbane resprouted everywhere, a bunch of new sprouts, and it was November. There was a freeze and all the sprouts died. So that was the wrong time of year to burn. That was a big lesson for us. And so the time that we would want to burn would be the time of year when we want the sprouts to come up. This patch is gradually being approached by urban sprawl, and rural sprawl. On the other side, we have a vineyard on one side, and we have a soccer field on another side, and a freeway on another side. Because it was tended for so long, it's pretty self-sustaining to a certain degree for now. Like if we just kept not tending to it, it would eventually dissipate and scatter. But because so much time and energy was put into it, literally thousands of years, that it's still going. It has that momentum to keep going for now. But now we're also we're pitching in again and giving it a little more inertia again to keep it going further. So I brought this here because it's a interesting moment for this, because I've been working at this patch for a long time and taking care of it, and and mostly just teaching people how to make cordage and making cordage. But only recently I decided to actually make something, a traditional item, out of the dogbane that came from this patch, and I made this traditional dance cape. And it probably took me about a year maybe to make this, so just because I was learning and trying to figure things out. And then just to get the feathers, this is eagle feathers, by the way, and that's 2-ply cordage right there. And this is a method that's used worldwide forever, all over, all across the universe. So I did something that the ancestors were doing with this dogbane. I did something too with that.
Thank you. Thank you for your time, and thank you to Redbird, Ben Cunningham Summerfield, Nick Tippon, Dr. Peter Nelson, Kat Anderson, Tamara Wilder, Marley DeSwart, and Amanda Cohen.